Lee Carter, better known by his stage name Viper, is an American rapper and producer, best known for his 2008 magnum opus, Your Cowards Don't Even Smoke Crack. Most famous for its poor production quality, eccentric lyricism, and rather singular themes, the album also presents a unique and valuable insight into the nature of commercial rap music in the southern United States, along with the socio-economic and cultural conditions that led to the creation of the art form itself. By depicting himself as a member of a new urban petite bourgeoisie, and also by presenting a mythologized version of his ideal self in the album, Carter presents a masterwork that is fascinating from both a Marxist and a postmodern perspective. Analysing the album from a Marxist perspective, the listener can see how Carter's depiction of class in modern urban America places the bourgeoisie on top, and how the oppression and alienation of the proletariat is seen as a positive, even by people like Carter, who grew up in the working class. As suggested by the title, the opening track of the album explicitly mocks the cowardly listener for not smoking crack. Crack is used throughout the album to signify a force of solidarity within Carter's dope scene, and to contrast the dumb, traditional upper classes with the enlightened boys who see what life is all about. Carter further encourages the listener to smoke crack, ostensibly so that they can become part of this rebellious proletariat group and live life to the fullest of their Gattungswesen, or species essence, as Marx called it. However, ulterior motives are also at play here, as it later becomes apparent that Carter also profits from the selling of crack. What becomes apparent in later tracks is that Carter in fact embodies many of the characteristics of this traditional bourgeois class that he ostensibly despises, such as greed, ownership of the means of production, and a disregard for the well-being of labourers. According to Marx, one of the primary methods used by the bourgeoisie to oppress the proletariat is the suppression of their Gattungswesen, their species essence, which ideally would be expressed in complete human freedom, but which is converted by capitalism into labour value. In this instance, Viper and his crack dealing business are suppressing the Gattungswesen of their lower level employees by getting them addicted to crack, and therefore making their lives subservient to their business interests. Viper also boasts in the track that there's a stash spot about sequestering money away from his own low-level workers, saying that the boys, his workers, can't get it, money, because he has hidden it in his stash spot. Given that, as stated later on the track, money is no object to Carter, it would appear that the only reason for this extreme selfishness on his part is to establish dominance over his lower-level workers and prevent them from experiencing the same betterment of economic circumstances that he has. This supports Marx's idea that low-level labourers, in this case Carter's boys, will inevitably be alienated from reaping the benefits of their own labour. Therefore, although Carter contradicts some of the ideas Marx had about the proletariat never being able to become the bourgeoisie without a revolution, he still fulfills this role of oppressor that Marx ascribes to the bourgeois owners of wealth. This dichotomy between the bourgeoisie, represented by Viper himself, and the proletariat, represented interchangeably by Viper's boys, other rappers, and even sometimes the listener themselves, is a direct inversion of the class dynamics of much of early hip-hop, which positions the listener to sympathize with the protagonist because of their struggles as a member of the proletariat. Carter states, again in the track, "This is how I ball," that "this lifestyle done got me complacent. It's like I'm living one big vacation." This line, although flippant in its original context, is particularly poignant when considered in the context of Carter's class status, since Carter is apparently permanently on vacation, i.e. he never works, and has already required sufficient wealth by these means to be rich already for life. What separates him, therefore, from the traditional bourgeois class that he mocks? Because from a Marxist perspective, really Viper is the bad guy here. Throughout the album, Viper, although claiming to paint a realistic portrait of his own life, actually presents a mythologized version of himself. Viper's self-deification, as well as his depiction of late capitalism, ties nicely into the ideas of French postmodernist philosopher Jean Baudrillard. In particular, his treatise Simulacra and Simulation. According to Baudrillard, the media of a capitalist society will, as that society reaches the stage of late capitalism, begin to reflect not reality, but a simulation of real ideas, blown out to extreme proportions and devoid of any real implication. He stated that this stage, which he called the third degree of simulacra, would be ushered in by a hyper-real media, which would reflect an idealized version of reality. Baudrillard also stated that this age of meta-imitation would be created and informed by the alienation of the working class in a postmodern, urban, and late capitalist environment. This album perfectly exemplifies this kind of third-degree simulacrum. Viper, throughout the course of the album, is impossibly confident and self-assured. At one point, he even states that he will never fall, despite the fact that he obviously can't be a full-time crack hustler for life. He also, at one point, compares himself to a solar flare, and even says that he ain't worried about his own mortality, because, in his words, the cash coming through. Considered within the context of modern rap music, with its impossible boasting and self-obsessions, Viper's comments can be taken as the hyperreal simulacrum of his own life within this context of confident rap music. Viper even acknowledges the absurdist nature of his confident boasts within the text itself in his admission, "Yeah, I know that I'm conceited and arrogant, but that's just my personality." Seemingly aware that his self-deifying lyrics are hard to believe, Viper even preemptively comments on the listener's perception of himself in the track I'm That S West Blood by saying that his ego is too much to swallow for the listener. The track list is further littered with examples of Viper acknowledging the presence of the listener within the text itself, whether taunting the listener for not smoking crack as in the title track, or threatening the listener with murder. Plenty of times, Viper breaks the fourth wall and acknowledges in the text that he is being viewed. This lack of distinction between reality and simulation is, according to Baudrillard, emblematic of the third degree of simulacra, the context within which I would argue Viper's work exists.